Let's talk about what happens when sales goes wrong. This is definitely not new as a concept, but I really love the spin on it that made it interesting to talk about. There's this concept out there that everybody has a range that they're tolerant of negotiating in. There's a book called Strategic Negotiation that lists basically like these no agreement zones. This concept that you've got is what happens when you fly way outside one of those no agreement zones. And from an engineering standpoint, you might be thinking, oh, well, they'll just negotiate it down. Like, let me throw out some really high number. Or depending on what side, if you're buying something, maybe it's throwing out a really low number, like lowballing somebody. But like, let me just throw out one of the extremes because I have no idea where to even go as a starting point. I know maybe I want at least this much, and I'm just kind of anticipating maybe getting like haggled down in a certain direction. So let me just throw out something on one of the extremes. That'll kind of be an anchor, and they'll come back and start negotiating, and we'll be able to kind of adjust from there. But that's not necessarily how it goes, is it, Nate?
Exactly. You'd think the principle of negotiation, start high, throw out a big number and let them negotiate you down. And by the way, that range actually is very different based on the person and the organization and the type of organization. And I'll tell you, there's like certain types of organizations that the range is much bigger than others. And we'll talk about that. When you buy a car, there's some people like me, I'll negotiate until the cows come home. I don't care. But there's most people who don't want to do that, who want to say, look, I just want to go in and buy a car and feel like I got a good price, right? That's all it is. And so that zone, that range is much smaller for most people because they don't want to go through the process of negotiating. And so what happens with people is if you throw out a number that's too big and way past their understanding of where they would go in that range and how much of that range they'd feel comfortable negotiating in, they will immediately say F you.
Sometimes literally, sometimes
literally,
internally, and just walk away.
And walk away. You are so high that they don't even, they're like, this is ridiculous. I don't even want to negotiate with you because you just gone way off the reservation, completely out of line.
It's not this logical thing that you might think of from like the engineering standpoint.
Emotional.
Exactly. You're off of logic, you're into emotion.
Right. And then you get an emotional reaction, which is either they say to you, F you, or they say, F that guy internally. So I had this boss that told me about this concept and he was like, well, that is the FU number. That's the FU number. And we worked with, by the way, governmental institutions. That FU number is much closer than it is at like large companies. So the range on government contracts is way smaller than it is at companies, basically. But that FU number is very important to understand based on the industry, the person, the process, because if you're too high, you will lose the deal because you threw out a number and they just were like, F that guy, bye. And they're gone.
And then you lose the deal, but all future stuff, they're just going to shut you out, right? Yeah.
They're shutting you out. This is where the art maybe comes in, but science too, of understanding what is that emotional response going to be, right? Where is that too high of number? And how can you come in maybe just underneath that number so that they do feel comfortable negotiating? And also part of it is building that relationship with them so they feel comfortable negotiating overall. That's the big thing is like, how do you stay away from that FU number? Because it exists with everybody. Yeah, inflation's crazy, but there's still a number that people will walk away and say, I'm not buying that thing. I'm not doing that thing because I just don't want to spend that much money. And it's an emotional reaction to that. And then you've lost them completely. So yes, that is a real thing. And I don't know if that's as aggressive as I once was on it, but yes, it's definitely a real thing. And I've seen it happen before on many occasions. And that goes for job offer negotiations as well. Like shoot high, but don't shoot too high because then they're going to just find that next candidate.
That's a really good point. So yeah, job negotiations. So basically it applies to any sales across the board. But so internally for engineering, that can also apply to your promotion cycle and negotiating there. Yep. And even just to take it back to the day-to-day again, architectural and design decisions are another good thing that can play into. The giant refactor. That's a great one. The thing where it's like, oh, I just want to get this feature in and it's going to refactor half of the code base. That's this very big, very risky thing. In that case, it's not necessarily a dollar amount to the team that's doing that, but it's like, what's the risk? How is this going to affect like the rest of our backlog? Is it going to clog up the other features that we get merged in while this PR is, getting merged in or while it's under development?
I think Alex just coined the FUPR.
There it is.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. Yeah. So as I'm kind of seeing it now, this also applies to intangible things as well. It's really that concept that you're getting back to is it doesn't necessarily matter what the thing is that's being negotiated on. It's really, there are extremes to any negotiation and you don't want to cross those extremes or you're going to emotionally trigger somebody.
Right. And I would say in the selling side, it's definitely more on the high end than the low end, right? And on the buying side, it's a little easier to go too low, but there's a point where you might go too low and then the seller just walks away, but they'll usually come back. So it's really, yes, there's the extremes, but really you want to think the FU number is on the high end. You want to price yourself in a place that strategically aligns you right at the top and allows people to feel like they can negotiate you down.
And so you're kind of hinting at being able to test the waters to be able to feel out what that number might be or kind of where it's sitting.
Mm-hmm.
And not that we necessarily need to dive into all of the specific techniques, but one of the broad takeaways here sounds like there's research or there's this exploration that needs to happen ahead of time.
Yes.
Before you go throw that proposal out.
Yes. And this is the thing that Alex, you and I have worked on before, is that especially if you're quoting a big deal, if there's any sort of custom negotiation, and by the way, it's more than just dollars. There's legal negotiations. These are complex contracts, these are complex documents.
Scope, timeline and scope is a really good one.
Scope, timeline, absolutely. Yeah, it's all factors in. But there is a point where you need to clear the budget with the people that have the budget. And let me tell you, that point is not the final presentation where everybody's on the call. You need to, first of all, have the right understanding of their budget early on in the process. If they think it's going to be $100,000 and you come back with $1 million, you're pretty far off. And they have not aligned that budget up to $1 million. It's just not happening. You can't do that on the final presentation and magically convince them to unlock $900,000. It's not happening. So you have to qualify early on in the process. What is the budget? Where can we target this? What types of scope do we want to add into this and cut out of this? And Alex and I have had these conversations late into the night about what do we want to pull out to make sure that we can hit the client's budget, right? To be realistic. The big thing is you want to make sure that you confirm budget along the way. And it's not just one call. It's not just one conversation, but it's over and over confirming that we're aligned. We're working on the same understanding and that we're not getting to that FU number up at the top. And so if you can keep a good relationship with a client and keep good conversation open to make sure that your scope is aligned, your budget is aligned, and like everything is aligned together with the client, then that's where you fall into the sweet spot. Really, it goes back to, have you had the right conversations with the client at the right time to ensure that your budget is aligned and that you've qualified for that the right way.
I do have one question. At any point in your career, have you been able to salvage an FU number scenario? And is that even possible?
Probably. It's been a while, because I try not to get into those scenarios now, but I think the way that you do it is you really have to swallow your pride and tuck your tail between your legs. And it's terrible. I seem to remember I have. And basically the way that you do it is you go back to the client and you're like, hey, so maybe that price was too high. So how about this? And it's just embarrassing. It's not a great way to negotiate. And usually they're like, no, we've already made a decision.
So looking back, I actually hit an FU number a few years back. I think like 3 employers ago, after I had left the company, the CEO or CTO contacted me that they wanted to find a vendor to keep supporting their product because the company where I was at wasn't doing a really good job at it. So he contacted me directly because I was the last engineer that actually kept a good standing relationship with him. And so he contacted me, and I don't remember the number I gave him, but I gave him the FU came up. So the FU scenario came up, and looking back, I'm like, oh wow, that was the FU number.
Did they just not even respond to you when you gave them the number, basically?
He did. He basically said something along the lines of, well, you're quoting me something in the same range of your previous employer, but your previous employer has teams behind that name, behind that company, and you're just you. That's what I basically got.
Interesting. So they actually gave you a reason why, but then they just walked away and didn't even do anything. The only way to recover that is to like really lowball them on the net. Okay, well, I'm really sorry. And then it's just like, it's kind of humiliating, right? So it's like most people just don't even recover from it because you're like, ugh. And that's why, I mean, in negotiation, it's classic, right? Never throw out the first number. If you had said, hey, what do you think a good range would be for this, and let him come up with a number, then you would have potentially the upper hand and say, okay, well, you said, let's say it was $100 an hour, right? And you could maybe bump him up, be like, well, I was thinking it would be a 120, right? And bump him up to that. And that would probably be usually the better way to do it. But also interesting, you may not have quite hit the FU number because he at least responded to you. And you knew what he was being charged. Now, I get his point. There's a whole overhead situation behind this, but like pricing should be based on value. This is a whole other podcast, but pricing should be based on value, not based on cost. It sounds like that person was probably trying to get a cheap deal, and he wasn't happy with the work, but like he clearly came to you because he was happy with your work. That seems a little shady because he was paying that amount and you gave him basically the same amount. And then he's like, no, which seems a little bit interesting.
So you hit something interesting there with value that was definitely going through my head. And it seems like by the time you get to a recovery scenario, it's probably not even worth continuing at that point anyway, if you've gotten there, because now the game has flipped and you're no longer selling based on value. You're selling based on price. And you're basically stuck then in, I think it's the Ackerman model, if I remember correctly, where basically you're just going back and forth, throwing out numbers until you land somewhere in the middle.
Right.
And it's kind of like a race to the bottom on price. And at that point, like, how much is that even worth your time, worth your services? Are your services actually valued at what you actually land on there versus going out and getting another client? And you've also got that misstep that's always going to be in their heads. So you've got that kind of looming over the rest of the relationship with that client. And maybe it goes away at some point in the long term, but like it probably through definitely your first engagement, it's going to be hanging over that entire engagement.
So there is a benefit to actually testing out that FU number because you get a little bit of data back if you have the opportunity to do this. So if you can go high and you start seeing rejections like that walk away or the absolutely not or the FU, then you're starting to see, oh, I'm going a little too high. And if you have no clients because you're quoting them all at way too high and they really want it to be, 20% lower, you'll start to see that. However, if you have a client that you quote at your normal rate that everybody else is paying and they're like, F you, then if you have the ability, and I know not everybody does, but just say no, because you should price based on value. And if your other clients are valuing you at X price and one client comes in and says, no, I'm going to give you half of that or whatever, or this is an FU number, then you probably don't want to work with them because they're probably going to beat you up on other things and continually beat you up on price. And you just, that's not the type of client that you want to work with. And yeah, it might hurt in the short run, but in the long run, it's going to help you overall. That's definitely a lesson that I've learned on price is like, yeah, let's negotiate. But if somebody really, really beats you up on price, they're usually not long-term the best clients, right? Like I totally get negotiation. There's reasonable negotiation. I'm not against it. But like if they're saying, oh no, I think you're worth half of what your software or your services are worth half of what you're charging, then they're literally saying they're valuing you at half of what your other clients are paying you. And again, maybe it's a signal that you need to lower your prices and you're overvaluing yourself. But if you have other clients and steady business that's paying you a certain amount, then you're not, and they're just undervaluing what you're doing.
You've got a couple good points in there too. And one of the first ones there is knowing your own value. And I think Avellino basically touched on that in his example as well. So there is a certain extent to where when you're pricing yourself and when you're throwing out your proposals and stuff like that, you actually need to know where you sit in the market. Do your own research around that. Know what you are actually worth, not just what you think you're worth. And that's one of those things that can help you kind of set a base for where you should be coming in at. One of the other things that you touched on there was testing the waters. There are different ways you can test the waters, and we don't necessarily need to get into a bunch of details on those. Just the fact that there are different ways that you can approach that is an important distinction, that depending on your approach, the perception of you and how offensive that ask is can be different. It can be extreme, or you can soften it. And maybe to put out one of the common examples out there where people can kind of do some offline research. When you say this, I think of like Chris Voss's work with like Black Swan Group and Never Split the Difference, the book. And I think of a phrase like, would it be unreasonable if X? So you're really, there's a way you can word it. So instead of saying, oh, we charge X for blah, that comes across a lot stronger than the other approach. So not that those are like the only two tactics. There's a bunch of little nuances there, but I think that's one of the important things that you were getting at that I kind of saw there is there are different ways you can have your message come across.
That is true. That is true. Although I would say that being confident about your pricing is going to really help you in the long run. And part of that is being confident in your pricing, but being okay with people basically saying F you, because then you start to see those upper limits. Then you can drop your pricing a little bit and then say, hey, this is actually more where I'm valued at. I would actually argue to say like, hey, this is what people pay for X. There's a understanding that you value yourself at that and other people value at that. And I'm just confident about that. It's okay. If you don't value me that way, fine, right? Like move on to the next person. I will say that probably works better in the long run to do it that way. And if you're okay losing the deal, you have to be okay losing the deal. If you want to win the deal, then definitely say, would it be unreasonable? But if you're okay losing the deal, then be very confident about it. Well, so this is what I charge. Done.
That rolls into another good point too, where you've been mentioning value a lot. I've been on both sides of this equation, but selling based on value, I definitely think is the way to go. Like that's right. Yeah. That's the rewarding and enriching side of sales to be doing.
Right.
And most people do fall into that boat of wanting value when they're on the other side and when they go out and want to buy something from you. But not everybody falls into that mindset. And I think it's something like 30%. I'm getting the statistic off the top of my head, so this might be wrong, but I vaguely remember something like 30% of people actually don't care about value and only care about the price they're paying for something. And they just want the cheapest thing out there. And so to tie that back into what you were just saying, if you're selling based on value, you don't necessarily want to win 100% of the work that comes your way.
Correct.
Because you're going to get some of those folks that just aren't a match for what you're doing, don't want to work the way that you're working. And like what you said, don't actually value what you're doing. Maybe they just want the cheapest thing out there. And if you're selling based on value, you are probably not the cheapest solution on the market.
Not the cheapest solution on the market. That's for sure. Yeah.
That's actually not a bad number, 30%, because that means that 70% of, the market is actually looking for value.
Yeah. Hey, if I had a 70% win rate at any company, 70% is great. Yeah. And that's a really good point. And by the way, this is emotional. Like when I lose deals, I hate it. It's not like I'm like, oh, whatever, right? I hate losing a deal. It's terrible, right? But it's back to that rejection, bringing yourself out of it, taking the long-term view and saying, you know what? It's okay. And you have to have yourself, you have to have management, you have to have leadership, all on board with the idea that, hey, it's okay to lose some deals, right? And in fact, I would argue that it's necessary to lose some deals to become a good salesperson, because then that's how you learn. It's like when I was learning how to ski and my mom was teaching me how to ski and I was 6 and I was like, oh, I fall. And she's like, you learn by falling. You don't learn by going down the mountain in straight 11s. You learn by falling, and then you get up and you figure out what you did wrong. And that was so true. And it's the same way with sales. You learn by losing deals. You have to lose some deals to be able to win a lot more. And, people understand this, right? It's like close rates are close rates. And if you close more than 50% of business, then you're like amazing.
Well, actually, there's a downside to that. So if you're closing 100% or you have a really high closing ratio, that could actually be a signal that you're priced too low.
Exactly. It's 100% a signal that you're priced too low. In fact, investors would always tell you, they'd be like, now they're going to see it in another number, which is probably your LTV to CAC ratio, but they're going to tell you like you're priced too low. Right. And 100% close rate. Yeah, definitely means you need to increase your prices. So
another angle here is we've been talking about the person on the other side of the negotiation and them having an FU number and their response to it. How do you manage your own FU number?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Let me back up with an assumption first. Would it be a fair assessment to say the person who has more self-control over their FU number will probably walk out ahead on that negotiation?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because then they're the one who can walk away, and then the person wants to win the deal, then they'll tuck their tail between their legs. Honestly, I haven't been super great at this because of inflation, and I know that's the swear word right now. I feel like everybody's kind of thrown their FU number out the window. They're like, well, I can't get it, and I want a couch, and like, whatever you need, I'll pay you for the freaking couch. And we went through this. Oh, it's going to take us 6 months? Oh, and then you delay it another 2? Fine, whatever. I guess we'll just take it. People are paying over list price for cars right now, or they were. And so I feel like that's a bit out of the window, but there is a number where it's like, okay, I just don't want to spend that. So where do I hit my own FU number? It depends on the product, obviously, and what I'm getting. Was your question, how do I handle it, or how do
you manage it?
It depends on the relationship. If it's a transactional product, I'll just, I'll leave, whatever. But if I'm talking to somebody, I'll dismiss it straight up. I'll be a little bit more like Abellino's former company. I'll actually say like, yeah, that's just not even going to work out. And I'll just sound super confident. And basically what you're trying to tell people is ultimately, I don't need this that bad. That's how I would do it, is be as honest as possible. Because I always hold the idea that somebody's going to negotiate with me. Actually, I'm doing this right now, but how I'm doing it is a little bit weird. I'm negotiating for something. I won't say what. And the price was online for the thing that I wanted to buy, but it's like contact sales, right? Here, click the button, contact sales. I give them a number that was 10% of the price that they listed on. So I was definitely giving them an FU number on the low end. They responded and they're like, hey, so typically we entertain offers that are like 10 to 15% lower. So this is an example of me just not responding because I'm like, well, your number is way too high and I don't want to pay that much, but I can't this thing. And so I'm just going to wait. And they've emailed me a few times and I'm just going to sit on it a little bit. And then I'll come back with an offer, but it's still going to be 50% of what they're asking for. And I'll see where I can go with that. So that's how I would do it, is like, I'm just kind of letting him sweat a little bit because I know he can't sell it to anybody else. I do feel like it's like way overpriced basically. And I'm like, I'll just let you sweat a little bit. It's not going to go anywhere.
It's funny because I've definitely done that before. Alex and I have got into setting up our own home labs, and I love getting like good gear in the used market. And I believe in recycling that type of hardware and giving it a second life. I've done that, like that exact process, and I've gotten really damn good deals to the point where Alex himself is like, what? You got it at that price? How?
Let him sweat. It didn't work super well during the pandemic, like the buying craze, but I think the economy is going to like settle out a little bit. And I think people are going to be less crazy buying. Like I bought this house. It's just like, well, there's no houses. So I guess we have to spend whatever. But I think that we're going to start seeing that settle out. And then you can start doing that process of just let him sweat for a little bit. See what happens.
So the big theme to that I'm gathering here is actually you're in control of not having an emotional response. You're not
Correct.
Letting it trigger you. And so by not being triggered about it, you can now think logically about the problem and about the situation. And now, instead of immediately reacting and blurting out whatever you might be mad or offended or whatever about from that number, you can now think tactics of how do I want to respond to this to keep the negotiation going. You now also have the power to end the negotiation and walk away when you feel like it.
Correct.
And if you're the one who has ended it, you can always come back whenever you want to.
The way you lose in negotiation is getting emotional about things. You're exactly right. And the way that you lose negotiation is you are the one that needs the deal to happen more than the other person. That's why the pandemic was tough on inflation and on deals, because you just couldn't get a deal. I needed a house, so I had to buy a house. We didn't get a deal. But in normal times, usually the person selling has to close that deal more than the person buying. And if you can set yourself up in a position where you don't need to get that product, and the thing that I always talk about is the cars. The dealerships have this saying, it's called the feel of the wheel will seal the deal. Because the whole point is if they get you behind the wheel of that car, you're in. You're emotionally attached to the car and then you buy it. And so the key is going in and saying, let's say you want to buy a car and it's non-pandemic times, walking in that showroom, totally drive the car, but know that you can go find that car anywhere else. There's another Subaru dealership down the street that's going to sell the same car to you. It's totally okay, but you want that car and you're like, I can buy it and it's only X dollars a month. And look at that. It's all perfect and beautiful and whatever. It just don't get emotional about it and always be ready to walk away. And then you will get great deals.
Well, one of the things that you're saying here that I think does apply to the bubble that we're in right now, as well as there's a theme of patience in all this too. Mm-hmm. So don't be the one in a rush. If you're the one who's got all the time on your side in the world, or that you at least come across that way, then the other person is going to be the one who is rushing to get this deal closed. So in the case of even where things sound pretty inelastic right now on price, where everything's kind of in a bubble, inflation's crazy, whatever.
Just wait it out.
Ride it out till there's a downturn. And then there's going to be a whole lot of stuff in the world that's on sale at that point.
Yeah, the stock market, absolutely. And I mean, it's so classic. Buy when everybody else is selling. Right. I mean, again, I bought a house in 2021, which we had to because we were moving back and that's how it, but like, I haven't bought a car, even though I'd love a new car, but I don't need one. So like, I'm going to wait, right? Like wait on things that you don't need until that happens. And it's very classic, like Warren Buffett, which I'm a big fan of Warren Buffett. Stay the course, right? Just stay the course, have patience, because eventually there's going to come a time where you can buy. And that's great. It's all back to buy low, sell high, and buy when everybody else is selling. So
this has been great. Any other words of wisdom or any last points on this topic that you want to leave us with, Nate?
Get to know people. And this goes for anything in life. I guarantee you, the person who it's easy to demonize is not actually usually a demon. And I mean this in everything. Politics, engineering versus sales, family, whatever. It is super easy to demonize somebody because they're different from you and because they hold different beliefs or they have a different job or they do something different. But if you understand them as a human and understand what drives them, you will have a more well-rounded perspective of the world and you will come to empathize with them, right? And you'll understand I'm driven because I have my comp as a salesperson is based on what I produce, whereas you're driven by you don't want to get stuck in a crappy project, right? So how do we mesh those two? And I think, we figured that out because Alex, you and I got to know each other, right? And understood each other's world enough that we were able to empathize with each other. But go to the places where the people who believe different things are, talk to them, just understand why they believe those things, right? That is really, really important. And I think that we talked about that at the beginning, but I want to summarize with make a point, understand that person, though it's easy to demonize them, is a human too. And if you get to know them, you'll probably like them.
That's such a good point. And yeah, the demon I was working with turned out not to be so bad. Only had to sell a little bit of my soul there.
You're talking about me, right? So,
I don't know, man.
Yeah.
That's some really good advice. And I think that is a perfect point to leave everybody thinking about as we wrap up here. So thank you very much for coming on the show today, Nate. This has been absolutely great. Hopefully we see more of you around. And to the rest of you, we'll catch you next time on the next episode of Full Stack Engineering.